Hello, I'm Demian Katz, the Director of Library Technology at Falvey Memorial Library, and also the lead developer of the ViewFind open source discovery project. I'm here today to talk a little bit about library and information services, past, present, and future. I think this is an excellent theme for a conference at the present time, and I hope to share some useful reflections on lessons from the past and present and strategies that we can apply to the future. I would like to thank Brainware University and the Brainware group of institutions for the invitation to speak tonight. And I would also like to apologize for being here by video recording rather than live, though I assure you this is probably better than me trying to speak coherently so far past my bedtime. In any case, I'd like to start by talking about some lessons from the past that we as library professionals could benefit from in the present and the future. And really, all of them boil down to a single theme, which is that technology changes, but core values should not. The library profession has some key values that have served us well over time. And even as technology shifts, these remain highly important to our work. First of all, openness. While certainly there are historical precedents of libraries that were only open to very exclusive audiences, I think in more recent years, a key feature of most libraries has been a desire to make information available as widely and to as many people as possible in order to advance society as a whole. In the new technological landscape, we are fortunate to have open access to a great deal of information, but some of this open information is available not for idealistic reasons, but because of more commercially motivated reasons. And as such, I think we should be aware that the landscape is always capable of changing in the future. There are also many resources that are made available through libraries that are perhaps not as widely available as librarians might like. And we should think about that as well and changing the shape of scholarly communication. But in any case, no matter how things change or what comes next, the core value of openness and sharing information should motivate us and drive us forward because it helps to define who we are and what we do. Also very important to librarians is organization. By organizing information in an effective way, we make it possible to find and utilize it more effectively. In the past, this, of course, manifested in the shelving of books. We now have moved beyond books in many ways, but organization of information remains just as important as ever before. And so as library professionals, we need to think about things like metadata schemes and data hierarchies and how they apply to the current technological landscape. Preservation is also vital. Not only have past librarians organized information to make it findable, they've also preserved it so that future generations could appreciate it. In the current digital landscape, we face new and intimidating preservation challenges. There is so much data and very little of it is being collected in a thoughtful way that takes into account long-term preservation. Again, as librarians, we can't possibly preserve all of the information that is out there. And indeed, in the past, librarians have not been entirely successful in preserving everything either, and have often had to work with others, such as private collectors or other external organizations, to continue to preserve culture that would otherwise be lost. But again, as we move into the future, we need to really think about future generations and long-term preservation and how we can retain the gains we have right now into the future. Finally, service is a key part of being a librarian. We could, of course, organize and preserve information to our heart's content, but if we weren't doing that in order to assist a particular audience, it would be fairly pointless. And regardless of what particular information resources a library holds, its librarians and the services they can provide to users are one of its greatest assets. This again is something that differentiates the library from large technology companies that provide information but use a purely self-service model. It's a challenge because end users really like self-service, and sometimes they prefer not to talk to another human being if they don't have to. And so we really need to market ourselves and think of creative ways to make ourselves available to users in ways that they find comfortable. But no matter how we do it, it remains important that librarians share the expertise and skills that they have with their users in order to allow them to make effective use of the open information that we organize and preserve. And that, of course, brings us to the present. We've all had a challenging year or so with a global pandemic, among other things. But challenges also provide opportunities to learn. And I think there have been some noteworthy lessons from recent challenges. One is that we all have a great deal in common. I collaborate with other librarians and programmers all over the world. And of course, we've always had shared goals and worked together well. But in the past, we all had very different life experiences. You know, climate varies from region to region. We celebrate different holidays. But during the past year, we've had a global shared experience in a way that I don't think there's a precedent for. We've all been having the same unique challenges, and we've had new things to talk about, which I just think is a strong reminder about commonalities between us all, and further motivation to pursue openness and sharing information on the largest scale possible to help the greatest number of people. This situation has also taught us that we are adaptable. None of us expected that we would be dealing with lockdowns and quarantines and remote access really just a year ago. And yet all of our libraries have had to adjust their service models and figure out ways to provide services to end users in changing and uncertain times. Tied to this is the fact that we are less tethered to physical locations than before. Uh, Librarians tend to love books. I certainly love books, but it has become even more apparent than ever before that a library is much more than a collection of books. And the services that we provide can have a greater reach than within the doors of our buildings. I certainly think there is a future for physical collections, and indeed one of the challenges of the pandemic has been providing access to physical resources to benefit remote users. But it also highlights just how much we can offer outside and beyond our buildings and in collaboration with one another. And of course, this has highlighted that we are still needed. Even with buildings closed and with limited access to physical collections, librarians have been in great demand. There's important research to be done, and everyone's daily information needs remain the same wherever they are located. I personally have been busier working remotely over the past year than I ever was at my physical location. There are access problems to troubleshoot, there are new technologies to evaluate, and there are always new things to think about. So let us at least take from the difficulties we've recently experienced the lesson that we remain relevant and are helping others. So with all those lessons out of the way, let's talk about strategies, because The past and the present have told us a lot, but the future is always somewhat uncertain. And we have the opportunity to make choices that will lead to a more effective future. First of all, never stop learning and diversify your knowledge. A conference like this is a great opportunity for continuous learning. And when I speak about diversifying knowledge, I'm really addressing the fact that as we've learned from our library classification systems, you can really subdivide knowledge to an infinite extent. There's always more that you can learn about any given topic. And so it's easy, especially in a technological field, to over-specialize and focus too much on a single thing. And while it is certainly always good to be an expert in something, it's also important to be aware at a higher level of the many other things that are changing and growing and developing all the time. So staying connected and learning new things will always serve you well. I also like to say it's important to know what is possible. Because if you don't know what you can do, you have much less chance of successfully doing it. And I say this as sort of a continuation of the last point. There is an overwhelming and intimidating amount of technology out there that we could spend time learning about, and it is completely impossible to learn all of it in depth. But if you learn just enough to understand what particular technologies are for and what they can do, then they're available in your toolkit when you have a particular problem that you need to solve. And at that time, you can devote more time to learning more of the details. So I would say, as long as you can remember what you can do, you can always find out how to do it when you actually need to. Similarly, I recommend thinking like a troubleshooter. This is another strategy for focusing in on what you need to know without being overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information that you could potentially learn. And what I mean is this. When you are troubleshooting a technology problem, or really any kind of problem, one of the things that you are doing is constantly asking yourself questions to try to narrow down the source of the problem. Have I tried turning it off and back on again? Or more seriously, what has changed since the last time this thing worked? Usually, when solving a problem, if you're working to restore access to something that is broken, asking that question about what has changed is going to tell you where the problem lies and lead you to a solution. But that kind of thinking doesn't have to be limited to solving broken systems. It can also be applied to solving brand new problems. If you need to offer a new service, you can ask yourself, what services do I currently offer that are similar to the service I want to add? Can I make some small changes to get closer to my goals? Or do I know of a colleague at another institution who has solved this problem? And could they help me find a way to get closer to a solution? It's really helpful to narrow down and find connections. And this can make a large problem feel much smaller and also lead you to a way to take a staged approach and reach a goal one step at a time. I also spoke a lot before about library values, but I think it's worth repeating. As we go into the future, we should always try to distinguish ourselves through our shared library values. It would be dishonest to say that we don't have a great deal of competition from other types of services that fill a similar space to the library. But the key difference, as I mentioned, is that many of those services are commercially oriented and are trying to make a profit and don't particularly care about user outcomes, except to the extent that it allows them to make more money. We as librarians tend to be motivated by a more genuine desire to help our end users and to further knowledge as a whole. And this really does differentiate us because it changes what we focus on and perhaps allows us to have a more long-sighted view of what we're doing than the next profit cycle. So always keep those library values in mind when you make your plans. Also, critically important is collaboration. Because there is so much to learn and no one can be an expert in everything, we need to rely more than ever on collaboration with colleagues. And I realize that not all of us have the same number of local colleagues. Some of us have large teams in our institutions who can work together to solve problems, whereas some of us are single librarians in very small institutions. But regardless of what situation you find yourself in, we all have colleagues because as librarians, we are colleagues in a broader sense, and there are many venues for communicating with one another. So certainly, if you are part of a team within an institution, I encourage you to have a conversation with your colleagues, share areas of expertise, and if you plan to do some learning, ensure that different individuals learn different skills so that you can solve a broader set of problems. But if you're by yourself and you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work that you need to do, connect with others in similar situations at other institutions. They are out there and there are ways to network. Things like the Code for Lib organization, for example, and I'm sure there are many others. Unfortunately, with a virtual conference, there is less opportunity to meet colleagues in person, but the current situation will not last forever, and hopefully there will also be opportunities for in-person professional networking again before too long. And of course, I include myself in this. I am your colleague as well. I will provide some contact information shortly, but do please feel free to reach out if any of my expertise could be of service to you. I'm always happy to share resources and information. And finally, prepare for change. As I said, we've learned recently just how much unexpected change can do. But even under more normal circumstances, change is the one thing that is inevitable, especially in technology. I've been working in the field for 20 years and I have seen an unbelievable amount of change, which in some ways is only accelerating. And so again, this is the reason to stay flexible, stay aware of what's going on around you. Don't spend too much time learning specific things because they may or may not be valuable next year, but be ready to dig in when you need to. Keep the high level view in mind. And hopefully by applying all of these strategies, we can continue to keep libraries useful to our audiences and relevant long into the future. Thanks again for taking the time to listen. And as I said, if there's anything I can do, or if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. Email is probably the best option. I'm damian.katz@villanova.edu. But you can also find me in the ViewFind Slack community or on Twitter @Demian Katz. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference.